Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. And from viewers like you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Elisa Vasquez. If you're a sports fan, you've probably noticed a lot of commercials for betting apps and services recently. What is responsible for this, and how has sports gambling changed over the past year? On this episode of Digging Deeper, Penn State President Eric Barron talks to John Affleck, Knight Chair in Sports Journalism and Society at Penn State, and Mike Algren, Director of Gaming Initiatives at Penn State, about the recent changes in sports gambling.
Well, thank you both for joining me. Fascinating topic, interesting topic, but what exactly is sports betting?
Essentially, it's a wager, at least in this country, on an athletic event. In other countries, it varies a little bit. You can, in the UK, you can bet on the outcome of an election. But our sports books and our regulatory authorities have decided that it's restricted to an athletic event. It has to occur on a field, and the outcome has to be available to everyone simultaneously. So, and I think that protects the integrity of the bet. So, in other words, a problem with betting on, say, the Oscars is that somebody knows the result before the public knows the result. So. That's one of the primary distinctions.
A common misconception about sports betting is that you can bet on anything. But there are a lot of sporting events, minor leagues come to mind, where there just isn't enough interest, what the industry would call action, for there to maintain enough of an incentive for there to be betting. There's also what are called prop bets, which are bets on things that will happen within the game. I was in London for the FA Cup final in May and walked into a sports book, and there were all sorts of bets you could make on how many corner kicks there were going to be, the way the goals were going to be scored, all those sorts of things, in addition to the result itself.
So, and we have prop bets as well. We can be sitting there in the middle of it and say, here's my bet on whether number 24 makes a touchdown or something like that.
Sure. I mean, most famously, there's, at Super Bowl time, when there's a lot of interest and you'll have a lot of prop bets, you will have things like, how long is the national anthem going to be? That was a controversy this year because the singer went back and hit a note again.
Oh, wow.
So,
that really is wide open, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's right in the still considered in the realm of sports gambling.
Yeah.
The length of the national anthem.
It's a small example.
But so,
tougher argument.
So you have the first part of this that it sounds like if there was interest, someone would find a way to enable the betting to occur. And I also heard you say about making sure you don't know the outcome, so there's sort of hints at some regulatory environment. Who regulates this?
Typically, it's not regulated at the federal level. It's regulated at the state level. So there are differences from state to state how sports betting is going to be treated. Because although we can look back historically at the gaming industry in the United States, and we can say that Nevada legalized in 1931, and then as states, New Jersey in 1976 and all the riverboat states in the 90s came online, they used the regulatory model in Nevada as sort of a guiding light, but to probably somewhat justify their own existence, they've all made their adjustments to it. So it'd be wrong to assume that from a regulatory standpoint, it's going to be the same in every state. It's going to vary, from state to state.
It varies from state to state.
Yeah.
So is that people in the state betting on something out of the state, and you're following that state's rules and regulations?
Right. Well, I mean, at this stage, based on the current laws, and that's really, tied to the Wire Act, which goes back to Robert F. Kennedy is the one that put that through in '61. It prohibits betting across state lines. So if you want to bet even online in a Pennsylvania sports book, the bet has to be initiated within the border of the state of Pennsylvania.
And we can tell?
Well, yeah. There's all the sports books. The sports books use geolocating to determine where the person is, and it appears to be quite accurate.
Huh.
When you get an app, when you get a betting app, you will be asked to allow them to
track you.
To track you, and you have to confirm that you're in Pennsylvania. If you're
so I could light up a map and see where everybody betting on everything across the U.S. was potentially.
I suppose
potentially, theoretically. I
Yeah.
don't know that such a database exists.
Well, I don't know whether that would be interesting or not, but a lot of times when we're doing all sorts of studies, people sit there and use phones to track. I mean, that's how we know how fast we can go down a highway. Mm-hmm. So it seems like you would...
At least legal sports betting.
Yeah, at least legal sports betting,
right.
You would just be able to see where the lights were all just sort of popping up.
Sure.
That would be fascinating. Well, how does this work then? So about, I think, 1992, there was a Supreme Court case that enabled all of this to happen. And now we've gone a considerable period of time, and it didn't seem like much was happening. Maybe that riverboat on the Mississippi or something like that. What happened to make all of a sudden this dozen or so states decide to legalize gambling?
Sure. There was a federal law in 1992 called, the acronym is PASPA, and it essentially legalized gaming, sports gambling in Nevada and 3 other states that had sports lotteries and the like. But it was illegal elsewhere. And then
by federal law?
By federal law.
Huh.
And then the state of New Jersey said, right, using a 10th Amendment argument, this isn't in the Constitution, you have to allow this to be a states' rights issue.
Right.
Argued this actually pretty unsuccessfully until 2018, when they got the case before the Supreme Court, and in a 6-3 decision, the court ruled that states could make up their own minds on whether they wanted to have sports betting. And since that time, we've had 13 states come online with full operations. 5 other states have passed legislation that will allow sports betting, and the District of Columbia, but they aren't operational yet. So right now we've got about 13 states actively doing this.
And so you have to follow the rule in the state. You have to be in the state, which is really interesting. Are all these laws starting to look the same?
I think there's a lot of similarities as far as I know, because again, I think the regulatory framework tends to come from Nevada. I think what's varying right now is whether, and it's an important difference, whether there's an online component along with the sports book, or whether the bettors are compelled to place their bet in a brick and mortar facility.
So in Pennsylvania, what is the rule?
It is online is legal. So and we're seeing a profound impact from those 2 factors occurring at the same time. I was just telling John that I was reviewing some of the revenue numbers from Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board, and if you take a look at, for example, Valley Forge Casino, they have a partnership with FanDuel, one of the operators of daily fantasy football, and their gaming revenues, overall gaming revenues from September 2018 to September 2019 increased by 50%. And really all of that increase is due to their sportsbook, and about 90%, over 90% of that sportsbook revenue is coming online. It's not being placed in the casino.
In the casinos.
It's being placed on people's phones.
Yeah.
So
does it mean there might actually be a decline in attendance at a casino because there are other betting opportunities?
Well,
that people feel like they have some intelligence in choosing how to bet?
Well, I mean, we know from studying repeater market or locals casinos all around the United States that the number one factor that people choose to visit one casino over another is convenience, and really, how easy it is to get to, or lack of transaction.
So online, incredibly convenient.
Very convenient,
Yeah.
and I think that's what we're seeing. And
So you cited a big number in 50%, most of it related to sports gambling. Do you have a sense of how many dollars that is?
Well, the handle meaning the entire amount wagered in the state of Pennsylvania since it was legalized here, which is almost a year ago, has been over $600 million.
$600 million in less than a year.
Yeah.
That's a significant amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then presumably the state of Pennsylvania gained some benefit from this?
36%.
36%
of the adjusted gross revenues. So you can figure that about whatever the handle is, which is the volume metric, right? How much is bet? About a little bit shy of 6% of that flows through to adjusted gross revenues. And then the state takes 36% of that, which is very high if you compare that to
other states.
West Virginia is 10%. New Jersey is, I think, 9% in their brick and mortar and 14% online. So Pennsylvania has a relatively high.
Does this
tax.
matter if you have a captured audience? Anybody in this state, if you want to bet, you're betting in this state. Does the bettor care what the state's taking?
It doesn't come out of the
Not
bettor.
really.
No.
It has an impact on
Profits.
on profits, and then also what the casinos are willing to invest in terms of capital expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take, I won't throw the name up, we can take one local gaming company that spent much more in the build out of their sports book in West Virginia than they did here in Pennsylvania because of the difference of what they have to share.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know what they're betting on?
Well,
I'm really curious whether Penn State's a big player in the book.
Oh,
for Pennsylvania.
I couldn't give you a Penn State specific number.
Yeah.
But partly because of what I said earlier about the interest being limited to certain areas, the industry funnels you toward the major team male sports.
Uh-huh.
So the NFL, the NBA, the World Series, MLB, college football, men's college football, men's college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
You wind up pushing interest, which in my world as a sports journalist pushes interest in stories about that area toward those sports where you can bet.
So we have an assumption that if you're interested, you will bet. And then they're making a second assumption, probably based on good data, that those men's sports are going to be of the most interest. So then they funnel people into that category.
I mean, if you're betting, there are only so many options. So the presumption is you'll watch this.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a bit of a cycle.
Yeah. It's interesting. But maybe a big game? Would they funnel you into a national championship in soccer or something?
I mean, not specifically. I'm sure they'll offer promotions around a game, but people know it's happening, and the audience is already huge. I mean, 19 out of the top 20 events ever watched on broadcast television are Super Bowls.
Yeah.
So in the United States, so
So
people are already watching.
Yeah. So, and if in this betting process you can do it in real time, I can be halfway through the game and make.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that brings up somewhat of an integrity issue when you're trying to protect the integrity of the game. There are people that fear that these in-game bets are perhaps more susceptible to somebody fixing, for example, the first fumble in the second half occurring by a particular team. One of those proposition bets that occurs in game is perhaps easier to affect than the outcome of a major game, which would take a lot of people to come together to conspire to do that.
So here must be the greatest risk is that you've got a lot of people involved, and data becomes extremely important. If you have the notion, for instance, whether that injured player will be back or not, which is held closely, but for which there could be an advantage. Given the fact that people look at referees now and decide whether or not teams get more penalties and others less penalties based on who the ref team. You start to look at anything that advantages you on the data side of things.
Yes.
And you just mentioned that even the instant activity, you know, we're already winning by a big margin. Even if I drop the ball, you know, we'll win. We got a W, but the spread will be different.
Right.
That this is where we get a lot of risk.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the risk is twofold. One is the impact on our student body with respect to gaming addiction. That's, I think, a major risk, and the other is the integrity of the sport. And it's much harder to, you know, if you're the NFL, you have 32 teams, one game a week. You have athletes that are being paid a considerable amount of money. They're probably less apt to conspire for a bet than perhaps a college athlete that comes from just a completely different economic reality.
Or a trainer, or the water boy, or
sure,
the
the player's uncle, or
the player's uncle, or just happening to know that.
Right. So it's you know,
Sam is injured worse than, but they've kept it under wraps to keep the game plan.
Yeah.
So the assumption is greater vulnerability in a college sport than a pro sport?
I can't say that for sure. I don't know that, but I think that advocates for the industry would say we're also in a situation where the lines are being monitored much more closely, and the betting patterns are being monitored much more closely because of legality. And so we're in a position where if something starts to fluctuate or look odd, regulators will know much more quickly.
So this is really interesting. You're suggesting that by virtue of having laws, we now have regulation and a lot of data mining and analysis, we may catch a problem like that.
Right. That's the.
We have more capability to do it than if it was unregulated and people were just doing it. Is it safe and secure when someone's online and making a bet? And how do you get a check in the mail? How does that work?
Well, they've spent a lot of time, you know, back when I worked for the American Gaming Association back in 2004 through 2006. One of the big questions was, I mean, people anticipated online gambling at that stage, and a lot of research was being done. Whether you could protect online gaming from people that were underage, for example, whether it was safe to place those bets. And so it's been tested for quite some time in anticipation of where we are now. And the answer seems to be that we can do a pretty good job of guaranteeing that people that are of age are the people that are going onto there, and that their funds are safe.
Yeah.
Much more so than, for example, an online sports book that's operating out of, you know, Costa Rica or somewhere else where we really have no regulatory oversight. I think that's one of the real, you know, compelling arguments in favor of legalized commercial gaming is that it's not opaque. It's not run by organized crime. We know when bets are placed. There are services that, like, as John was talking about, that let us know when strange bets, you know, are placed sort of at high numbers in the midst of a game. We can find out in real time, and then we can take a proactive approach to it. So it should really enhance the integrity of the game. I think it's a daunting task for those responsible for doing that. But
so, John, you know, we're running around, I think universities are running around making sure that we have the rules in place, and you know, you're on the board of trustees. You shouldn't be placing bets because you have some level of influence. You're a president. We're educating team members and things like that. And we're kind of hustling, I think, to do this to make sure we don't have people with some information that's very valuable to have them understand what the significance of it. But it's also an opportunity. Pennsylvania law, you can do 50-50 in Beaver Stadium. Will we get negative press about that if we do it?
I think if somebody is in a position where, I shouldn't even say I should probably say when, given
Yeah.
given the state of
The
the
draw
world.
for the dollars is
Right.
significant.
I think if someone does that and is caught doing that, it will be a major story. It will be a major scandal. I think there is, on a slightly tangential point, one of the things you are seeing is, just talking to my students, there's an exponential rise in discussion about lines when you're talking about sports. So it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of people out there with some little bit of information, and they may act on it.
They may act on it. Well, I'm so sorry. We're running out of time. This conversation went so fast. Just quickly, what do you think it'll look like in 10 years?
I think most states, I think we'll have the majority of states will have online sports gaming. You'll start to have much more national advertising. There'll be a few holdouts like Utah that don't have it. I think we have to hit a mark somewhere in there where there's a peak.
Yeah, we're still on the way up.
Yep.
Any quick thought?
Yeah, I think that it's going to continue to spread, and I think particularly what's going to be really compelling to the states that haven't adopted the online component is they're going to take a look at what's going on in Pennsylvania right now with that, and they're going to include the online component to the sportsbook.
Well, thank you both so much. A fascinating topic. Fascinating.
So thank you so much, President Barron, for speaking with us today.
My pleasure.
Sports betting.
Fascinating topic.
Yes, and in the interview, you talked about how it's really going to affect Penn State students maybe because the prospective bettors, the demographics, it says that bettors might be age 34 or younger. So how do you think this is going to affect Penn State students and college students overall?
It's interesting because this is a very digital age, and this is a digital tool, and it's easy to do, and students are very enthusiastic about sport and very enthusiastic about Penn State sports. So you worry about whether or not a student might get in trouble, that the tuition dollar just got placed on a bet and they don't get to finish. Hopefully it's not a common occurrence, but what I learned from the two individuals that I interviewed is the addiction rate in the normal population is about 1% to 2%. So there's sort of this sense that here's this big revenue generator, and the problem part of it is 1% to 2% of the population. But they said in the college-age population, the addiction rate is closer to 6%. So this suggests a certain amount of vulnerability with youth or with the interest and the tie to a school or something like that. And so this is something to worry about, I think.
Especially with technology. He talked about with it being online, there's a higher level of conveniency. There's new apps that are being created. So do you think that technology is going to exacerbate the gaming addiction?
It is. Another example that I heard was you're sitting there looking at the line, Michigan and Maryland, and you're going, I've watched each one of these games intently. I know they'll beat that or whatever else, and then it's so easy to sort of click, and plus to do it in the middle of a game as the game proceeds, or maybe you get in the hole in a bet and then you see, well, you know what, I think this touchdown's going to occur and save the day, and this will get me out of the hole. It's going to be interesting to watch, and for Pennsylvania, it's not even a year old.
Yes.
$600 million, and it's not even a year old.
And if it's legalized by all states, the revenue is estimated to be $15.8 billion in the next 5 years. How do you think this economic growth is going to affect our economy?
I don't know what it'll do to the economy. It's interesting. It'll be interesting, but it's a big number. But what will it mean for the states? What will they do with the money? Will it be just balancing the books, or will they invest it in human services or something, or K through 12 education that really starts to have a positive impact?
And the feasibility of this, in the interview, the three of you talked about how it could be easier to legalize it because a lot of the regulations are similar across state lines. So how feasible do you think it's going to be for all states to create betting laws?
You know, I think that, as we've seen with many other things, lottery or whatever else, I think the enticement of the revenue without raising taxes will be too great.
What do you think colleges should do to monitor these changes and problems that could occur?
Well, you know, we just described the worry that a student would get into trouble. And I think the other part of it is this law came very fast in Pennsylvania. And having the time to really educate all the people that touch sports. There's a certain amount of temptation there. And yet, as we heard, the scandal would be incredible if you discovered that extra information allowed someone to profit or even make people make a mistake on or do something wrong on a game, where you look and say, well, did we actually lose that game because of bets that were on that game, that someone just did something and it was a mistake and it caused a problem? I think the scandal could be considerable. And so we really do have to work on the education. We really do have to work on the care. And hopefully we won't have students that will get in trouble.
Yes, definitely making sure that student safety is first.
Yep, that's first.
Thank you, President Barron.
My pleasure.
Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association. Connecting alumni to the university and to each other, the Alumni Association is powered by pride. And from viewers like you. Thank you.